Hi everyone, welcome to 2019 and the first Transformation Tuesday of the year. Today I really want to talk about resolutions and change. It's so common towards the end of the year as a new year is starting for people to talk about and make statements, really bold statements about all the things they're going to do, who they're going to be, and how 2019 is going to be way better than 2018, right? It's always this, let's close the book on this year, let's open up the door to an amazing year in front of us. And I love the optimism. I love the willingness for people to start to evaluate their life and make changes to be the person that they want to be. What's hard though is those changes are often really externally motivated. They're motivated by the pressure of a New Year's resolution, by the ending of one year, from literally changing what we write from an 8 to a 9 and having this pressure really come in of, I must want to be or have to be different now because the year is changing. Some marker of time is passing, and therefore I must be ready to make some change. But a lot of the time, those changes, because they're so externally motivated, are pressures from cultural norms, what we think we should or are supposed to do. And I know I've talked about this in previous talks about externally motivated language, right? I should be doing this. I have to be doing this. I must do this because I feel like I have to, right? I should be working out more. I should lose weight. I should have a better diet. I should get more sleep. Whatever it is for people, it's always laid down by shoulds and supposed tos. And I just think it's really important for us to step back and think about what pressure are we putting on ourselves and on the people around us to make those changes. Do I think that we should stay in our stagnancy, live in the predictable shittiness? Absolutely not. If that was the case, I wouldn't have a job and I wouldn't spend time talking to you all the time. But I do think that change has to come from a place that's internal. I think change is something that is really motivated by our values, motivated by introspection, by curiosity, and then the courage to really show up and be that person that we see the potential for within ourselves or that we strive to be that would bring us more joy or congruency to our authentic self. I also think it's really important for us to think about what change really looks like. So, if I'm somebody that wants to make a change in my life, I have to be willing to put the work in to do it, right? And when I was in graduate school, there was this really awesome phrase. I want to say that it's tied to a therapeutic orientation, but because I can't remember, just know that I learned it in grad school and it's applicable to anybody. It was this idea that true change is 50% insight and 50% action. Now, what 50% looks like to each one of us obviously is going to be slightly different, but the reality is what it's ultimately saying is everything requires insight and action. It means that we can't just say, because it's January 1st, I'm ready to make a change. We can't just say, oh, I'm 40 or I'm 18, therefore everything in my life is going to change because of some arbitrary force, right, that's going to come up inside of me. Instead, I have to work on building the insight, the awareness, and create buy in to whatever the changes that I want to make. So, for example, if there's somebody that's going in and talking to their doctor about wanting to quit smoking, everybody knows, regardless of if you smoke or not, that smoking's not good for your physical health, right? It doesn't offer us any value in any way, shape, or form. That's not going to be enough to make somebody want to make the change. It's going to need to come from something that is greater than the pros, greater than the additives that someone has found smoking to add in their life. And I'm not just going to say by January 1st, I'm going to expect that I'm going to wake up and suddenly have that motivation. Instead, what I have to look at is how do I connect to the greater value inside myself? How do I identify, get curious about, and really think through all of the different barriers that there have been in my past and are sitting in front of me now and in my future to make the change I want to make? How do I learn the coping skills to deal with distress? How do I set my schedule up or make changes in my life so that I'm eliminating those possibilities to fall back into old habits and routines? And if I jump too quickly into action, one, if I'm motivated by that external pressure of I should stop smoking, right? I need to quit smoking. Or if I just feel like I want it now, what I'm forgetting about is all of the work, all of that introspection, and all of the buildup that's required for it to be sustainable. It's oftentimes why I see people that want to make a change and they start it, right? I'm sure you've all seen this in yourselves or people around you. Come January 1st, everyone's got their resolutions. I used to manage a gym. I would see a huge influx of people that would come in the mornings, evenings, all the time, just ready to go, right? And all the regular people, or the regular comers, the members, that was a terrible mix up, regular people. All the people that were the everyday members of the gym would suddenly not be there, right? And we would talk about this. Oh, I'll see you in February. I'll see you when the rush of everyone that is coming in is no longer here anymore, because they rushed to action before they did any of that work that I talked about. And by not actually building that insight and creating a plan for longevity, right, they can't handle the short-term distress. And I talk about this a lot with clients. A lot of what we work on, and people are like, I just want to get to the end point, right? I just want to be in recovery, or I want to be happier, or I want to be able to do the things I want to do. And it's really difficult to handle the distress up front. And I always come back to, this is short-term distress. And I know short-term is relative, but it's short-term distress for a long-term gain. I can't have you jump into action right now, and I can't empower you to jump into action before you're ready, because I see it all the time, right? Then you're the one that goes to the gym every day, you hit it really hard, you're like, I'm going to do this, and then 3 weeks later, you don't want to go anymore because you're miserable, because you haven't made a plan for dealing with the physical, the mental, the emotional distress and change that comes from adding or changing in a habit. So, all in all, there's this necessity for us to create what I like to think about is a fanny pack of energy that I am using. I'm building up stores that every time it feels hard, I can spend a little bit of that energy to get through it. And I've built up enough of it that it'll kind of get me rolling to the point where then I suddenly have momentum and I don't actually have to require so much initial input to do whatever it is I want to do. On the flip side, there's the action phase, right? So I'm talking all about building insight, and then there's this thing we actually have to do. And I see problems on the other hand, right? Sometimes I see people that, again, like I said, will jump so quickly into action that they go back to square one and they feel disgruntled and hopeless and just disheartened, right, at the whole process. And it might take them years again before they're willing to try. I also see people that get so afraid of the action phase. And a lot of the times that has to do with staying in our comfort zones and not really wanting to set ourselves up for growth, where people are spending so much time getting the insight that they are trying to mitigate all of the risk to the point that there's no discomfort anymore. And that's never actually going to happen if we're making true change. I think about this for me as a public speaker. I know I've talked about this before, but I spent 5 years building insight before I started actually speaking in a community setting. I was learning and trying to perfect my craft, but the reality is I was hiding out. I wanted to make this change, but I was so fearful of the judgment, fearful of failure, fearful of all the things that are going to get in the way, that short-term distress, but in a very different way, right? That kind of growing pain that everyone has to go through, that I stayed stuck in the insight phase and didn't want to make the change. And I think it's important to just take note of, again, both of those pieces, the building the insight and the action, are required to get to where you want to go. So for you, I want you to think a little bit about, how has your relationship looked like with the insight building phase? How has it looked like when you have to move from insight to action? Where do the hurdles come in for you? Are you impatient? Are you rushing to action? Are you feeling forced into action because of some sort of externally motivated thing, like a New Year's resolution or a birthday or a move or whatever the case may be? Or are you somebody that is feeling like you can't make those changes, that you have to work on really building your self-esteem and confidence in what you want to do before you can jump into that action phase? And how do you know what the balance is? I feel like this is an ever-growing discussion, this thing that keeps expanding. There's so many different people that have different needs, different wants, different goals, and what that looks like for us depending on the change we want to make, who we are, and what's reasonable for us in that moment, right? All of those things are going to make what insight and action look like be different. So I want you to think about this for you in terms of where you are right now. We're about, 2 weeks into January. Did you set a resolution? If so, why? What made you feel the need to set a resolution? Did it actually align with when you were ready to dive into action and make the change? Or was it because you felt like you had to because everybody's talking about New Year's resolutions? If you are working on one, how's it going? Have you been able to maintain the things that you set up that you wanted to do? Or are you finding yourself getting disgruntled and disheartened or feeling hopeless because that short term distress is something that's too difficult to manage right now? Regardless of where you are, I don't want you to put pressure on yourself to either push through or to come up with some sort of goal and make a change. I want you to instead just turn inward and invite introspection. Get curious about, again, what are those things that you really want to do? What are the gaps? What are the barriers? What are the hurdles you're going to have to sort through if you want to do it? And what is waiting for you on the other side? What can anchor you to feeling like you can get to that action phase eventually because you feel more empowered to think about or excited to think about the changes that could occur if you do these things? And then the other piece of it is to be patient with yourself, right? Not just because sometimes we're not ready. That's a huge part of it. Maybe I want to make changes in my life and I'm not ready. And we'll talk about this in a few weeks, but it comes back to this model of stages of change and motivation. So on the one hand, it's about being patient with yourself there. It's also about being patient with the process. Knowing that what it actually is going to look like to build that insight and turn it into action and to rework it and to stay in that action phase as you're editing and rewiring your brain and changing up your processes is going to take time. It doesn't mean that just because on January 1st I say I'm going to work out more, that suddenly I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week, I'm going to be able to lift the amount of weight I want to lift or go to the classes and not have any problems, and everything's going to work out the way I want to. What if instead my New Year's resolution was I'm going to focus on a value of health? And then I take time to define what does health look like for me? So one thing I'm working on is my health has a lot to do with my sleep and how my brain is working. And when I can take space for myself, I feel like I'm able to come back down and reground in myself. So, two things I'm really focusing on are taking time to get to the gym, not because I need to work out and lift a certain amount of weights or get X amount of minutes of exercise in, purely because I know when I go to the gym, it's a space where I am completely devoid of any conversations. I'm able to put my headphones in, jam out to music, and I purposely don't turn on Wi Fi when I'm there. I have no excuses to stay connected to anyone else but me in that moment. And then the other thing I'm working on is also disconnecting when it comes to my sleep. For me, health is going to be reconnecting with myself and taking that space. And so it doesn't mean I can never look at my phone in the room again or I have to be at the gym X amount of times. It means I'm just going to make an honest attempt every day to show up and do the best that I can to start moving the needle forward ever so slightly. And I'm going to jump back into insight and into action a lot because I'm going to learn new things about myself and then figure out how to implement them into my life. This next week, I want you to not only do some of the reflection about what I brought up, but just take notice about some of the goals that you have right now, some of the changes that you want to make. And I want you to be honest with yourself about where you really are. Are you ready for that change? Are you ready for insight? Are you in the insight building phase? Are you trying to rush to action? And then ask yourself what it would look like if you slowed that pace down a little bit and you worked on being patient. Or on the other hand, what if you took all those specific goals off the table and instead of saying I have to work out X amount of days or I have to eat this type of healthy diet or I have to call these people, call my family more or do all these things, what if instead I boiled it down to what's the value underneath? And I instead made a commitment to keep working on living in line with that value and gave myself the flexibility to make those changes, to work on the insight building, to move into the action phase as I learned more about how that value shows up for me and what it looks like to implement it into my life so that I can move forward to be the person I want to be and do the things I want to do. As always, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, please message me or put something down below. I love to hear from you. My goal is only ever to share wisdom with you and help empower you to do the things you want. So if I can be in service in any way, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week for our next Transformation Tuesday.